a show where we count things down from number 5 all the way to number 1. And this week on Top 5, our top 5 vacation destinations. Now, as Rodrigo, you said that this seems like a topic we've done recently.
Yes.
Like 2018 recently.
I mean, that is recently for top 5, since top 5 this version of top 5 comes out once a week, once every other week.
Once every other week. But here's the thing. The last time we did anything with vacations, it was dream vacations.
Right.
Like if we could go anywhere, do anything, that was that episode. This week, though, we're doing top 5 vacation destinations. And I think that makes it a little bit more realistic. Now, maybe not for Ashley, because, man, Ashley's going everywhere every week to somewhere new.
I will brag and say I think I've been to almost 40 different countries.
Wow. Nice.
Hashtag white privilege. I travel very easily, even on a visa.
Well, no, it's funny because, and I don't know if what's on your list for this week's top 5, but I enjoy watching yours and Jason's Instagram feeds, because occasionally you're just like, hey, this weekend we're on top of a mountain somewhere. And
we do. Okay.
Or we're doing a tour of a ghost town in the middle of nowhere.
That's true. Those are both things that we've done quite recently, at least at the time of this recording. I will say, and I'll get more into this, I'm sure, but I like to go places I don't go to places to shop.
Oh, yeah.
And I do mostly go to places to see if there's a mountain I could be on top of.
Oh, really? Okay.
That is like primo. It's like, is there a hike that's going to turn my legs into jelly? Or is there a mountain we can climb?
All right.
Top 2 travel criteria.
So here's how I set up my vacation destinations. Number 1, you'll enjoy all of these, Ashley, because they are hiking and or could lead to the top of something tall.
Heck yeah.
Number 2, these are all places that I have visited sometime in my past, a couple of them in the same vacation trip with my parents.
Nice.
Yeah. So, Rodrigo, why don't you start us off with your number 5 this week?
My number 5 is so one thing that I'm trying to do with this list is to have like more specific things to differentiate it from the last list. Specifically, I think a good destination would be Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Ooh.
If you are going to the hot air balloon fiesta, which is, I believe, the largest hot air balloon like convention basically in the United States. But of course, because our hot air balloons is not in a building, it's like out in the desert.
Right.
And there's just like thousands of balloons. You don't even have to go in a hot air balloon. You can just watch all the weird balloons. This one is all the way down at 5 because I've never been to it, so I can't vouch for it.
You've seen all the crazy pictures, though.
I've seen all the pictures. I've been to other balloon fests, and usually everybody there is like, oh yeah, I can't wait for Albuquerque. So it comes very highly recommended.
Very, very, very cool.
Yeah.
My number 5 is a big park. The first national park in the United States, and maybe the first national park in the world. I'm talking about Yellowstone National Park, that covers Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho. This is a beautiful place. If you've never been to Yellowstone, I highly recommend that at some point in your life, you make the trip to Yellowstone National Park to check out just really I think the coolest part is the volcano activity that is there. Not like erupting magma far up into the sky, but this is where you have Old Faithful, you have the thermal, what are they called? The prismatic springs, where you walk and it just smells awful because it's all sulfur just coming off. But, the minerals and everything in the water just change everything to a different color. You can see some wonderful waterfalls and some crazy animals. I mean, the first time I ever saw a moose up close was when I was in Yellowstone, and I walk out of a cabin early in the morning, and sure enough, there's a giant moose face right in front of me as it's eating branches from the tree. And then, of course, it skedaddles soon after that. But I took this trip, I want to say when I was would have been like 1980 or 82 maybe. 80 would be about the latest for this trip, just because of where it's at. But this is a very nice, beautiful place to go to, and I highly recommend Yellowstone National Park. Go see it now before the caldera erupts and we're all wiped out. So there you go. That's my number 5. Ashley, what do you have for your number 5?
My number 5 is a teeny tiny little town in Europe. In France. I love going to France because as someone who speaks French, the French people are very nice to me, and I get a kick out of watching them be not nice to anyone else. I'm talking about Nice. Nice is on the French Riviera, technically. It's on the Mediterranean. It's so little. You can walk across it in like a half an hour. It's so teeny and so beautiful and still so quintessentially French. They have an amazing seaside, great restaurants. It's one of those sleepy little towns where like there's nothing to do except revel at the fact that you are in Europe and go to the beach. And then as a North American, be astonished that people are nude at the beach.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw a naked dude kill a jellyfish with a rock at Nice Beach once. That was a real treat. They also have a really, really incredible modern art museum that has like Andy Warhols in it,
Wow,
and a
cool.
really weird sculpture that's just a teacup with a tampon in it. And I have to say, I didn't get it. But before I moved to the United States, I bought the train pass and I went all over Europe. And Nice was one of my favorite places that we went. It was truly incredible. It's so beautiful. And we spent a lot of time in big cities doing the big city things. And if you are looking for a place where you can just unwind and enjoy a very different, like the south of France is very, very different from what you think of as like a Parisian culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Nice is the best place to experience that. I would go back there in a heartbeat. Also, on the main walk down to the beach, they have these weird naked man statues that are filled with light, and they look like Dr. Manhattan. So that's a real treat. I think it's incredible, and I tried to include places that I had been on this list, and I also tried to include a fairly diverse group. Like I could have made this list of just places in America, or or
sure.
places in England, or just
Right.
So I was trying to pull from different countries, and Nice is my favorite place in France, and I love France, so I want to put it on the list.
All right. Well, please tell me that the rest of your list also features either naked men running around on beaches or naked man statues.
4 of the 5 do. I could tell you a naked man story about. I didn't put Amsterdam on this list, and that has a lot of naked people, but it's a trip.
All right. I have not been to 40 different countries. I have been to, of course, the United States, Mexico, and Canada. Those are the 3 countries that I have visited.
You've been to, what are we, NATO? Is that what we are? NAFTA?
Yeah. Yes.
One of those?
Yes.
I
NAFTA.
am Texas. Woo!
Rodrigo, what do you have on your number 4, I think is where we're at on our list.
Yeah. For my number 4, again, I have something specific, and that is it's Mount Vernon, Washington, which is a little town.
Mm-hmm.
There's you can drive by, not much going on there most of the time, but for a few weeks out of the year, it kind of becomes the center of a massive tulip festival. It's
cool.
the Skagit Valley Tulip Festival.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are not a globetrotter and can't go to European countries that are famous for tulips, this is a good kind of it's a good way to see massive fields of colored flowers, because tulips are like really kind of impressive flowers in general.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like most flowers and most pretty flowers don't grow at eye level, but tulips do. So they're just like really tall, really colorful. If you are standing in a tulip field, it's really impressive. If you go over there and stand on a hill, it's like more impressive, because apparently they put them in there in like lots of different ways. They've got food. They've got fair stuff. And I found these are all like, again, except for the Albuquerque Balloon Festival, these are all places where I've like found myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, you know what? There's a place where I would probably return to, hopefully when I'm not working, because a lot of these I ended up there while I was working.
Yeah.
So the Skagit Valley Tulip Festival, it's, if you find yourself around the Seattle area in April, you can look into it. It's going to be a drive, but it's pretty nice.
Yeah, very cool. Very, very cool. Now, my number 4 is one where you have to go deep, deep, deep down into the earth. Well, maybe not deep, deep down, but you do have to, if you want to see the bottom, you have to take some little trails, maybe ride a donkey down to the bottom. Mm-hmm. It is a natural formation, also a national park here in the United States. It's the Grand Canyon.
Oh, yeah.
Formed by the Colorado River in Arizona. The first time I went and did this, again, when I was a young lad, and it kind of felt like National Lampoon's Vacation, where they're all like, look, kids, the Grand Canyon. Okay, let's go. And it was like we were on our way to somewhere else. And so we stopped just very, very briefly. And it was like, oh, okay, I really didn't get a chance to look around. But I went again a few years later. And this time we had a chance to go around to all the little scenic spots. We didn't have time to go down to the bottom of the canyon. But my goodness, different times of the day. If you're going to go to the Grand Canyon, there is a lodge that is built right on the edge of the canyon, to where the rooms that are the most expensive are the ones that obviously overlook the canyon. But wake up first thing in the morning, like I did the first time that we saw this, and you've got, the mist and the fog, and you've got the cold weather and the clouds rolling through. It just looks beautiful in the morning. Noontime, it takes on a whole different look. And then again in the evening, a totally different looks, just depending on where you're at in the time of day in this beautiful natural formation here in the United States. Back in, it was 2002, I was planning a road trip on my own to go back to the Grand Canyon because I didn't, I just had this longing. When I moved from California back to Kansas, there was a moment where I could have veered off and driven, 2 hours north and gone to the Grand Canyon again, but I didn't because I was trying to get to Kansas to start this job, and I didn't have that extra amount of time. But in 2002, I had made this kind of impromptu idea that, I'm just going to go down to the Grand Canyon and spend 3 or 4 days there, just, exploring, doing whatever tourists do and just having fun. But at the last minute, I backed out. It's just like, you know what? I'm not going to go to the middle of a place where no one knows where I'm at and just go into her in case something happens. So I decided to stay home, and that was the same weekend I met my wife. So this weirdness of deciding not to go to the Grand Canyon for a third time actually proved to be a pretty good deal. So Grand Canyon, my number 4, still a wonderful, wonderful place to go and visit. Ashley, what do you have for your number 4?
I do want to echo the Grand Canyon because I was taken there, not against my will, but I would say unenthusiastically, being like, it's a hole in the ground, and it's truly so incredible.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a really, really good pull. My number 4 is also in Europe, and it is my favorite city in all of Europe. It's a city that I read a lot about, and I felt very cool reading Christopher Isherwood stories as we rolled into Berlin. When I was a tiny, tiny human, my dad always said that if he lived anywhere other than Canada, he would live in Germany. And Germany is cool as all get out. I truly love Germany. I think it's so incredible. I have so much admiration for the fact that they are very honest about their history, and they have a lot of monuments and a lot of art that is dedicated to that. I respect that because there's a lot of other countries that aren't as on the up and up about, some of their past, our own included. And so I commend them for that. The German people are truly the nicest people, and they all speak perfect English. But unlike the French, who, again, I love, if you are trying to speak German, they will help you. They will be very patient and understanding about your terrible accent. And I like to try to give it my best go. But I think Berlin is one of the coolest metropolises that you can find yourself in. And part of it is the incredibly rich history that is there, whether you're talking like straight up history, art, history, cultural. It's so incredible. I've had the best coffee in Europe in Berlin. I went to the coolest bar in Berlin. Everything I did there was so incredible, so impactful, so meaningful. And as someone who grew up in Canada, Berlin, from a weather standpoint, feels like very at home. It just kind of like rains all the time, but the summers are really hot. And then it has a really great zoo in the middle of it that has one of the highest diversity populations of any of the zoos in the world. And it's known for being very humane. They had that little polar bear there, Nut, who was rejected by his mom. He unfortunately passed away.
Yeah.
But I saw him when I was there. And I just think I feel about Berlin the way I think a lot of people feel about New York when they feel it for the first time. Like, it feels like a magical place. And it was somewhere that, just because of my interests and what I was reading, I was very, very aware of. I love the show Cabaret. I've done it, obviously set there. So it's, for me, like a fairy tale, like nothing about it disappointed. I would go back in a heartbeat. And I mean, I think there are other amazing, amazing places in Germany. I think Neuschwanstein is cool. I think Munich is amazing, the Christmas market. But Berlin, I truly can't recommend to people enough. And when people are going to Europe, I always recommend that they stop by.
Mm-hmm.
And they sell food all night long, like a real city. So you can go and do whatever it is you're going to do at whatever establishment, and then go get some dope currywurst at like 2 a.m. in the park. And that's really fun too.
Hey, I love it. We have restaurants that are open 24 hours here. I mean, it's McDonald's and Taco Bell, but still.
I mean, we hardly do it in LA. LA closes at like midnight, which is insane.
Yeah.
Like Seattle closes at like 8:30. Like, I am amazed at times when I've been downtown and like nothing is open.
Mm-hmm.
Like, not even a diner.
Like, not even like, I guess maybe it makes sense, but I'm like, I would expect Starbucks, since it sells coffee, would be open late.
Yeah.
Especially the Starbucks in downtown Seattle. But no, they close up pretty early.
Wow, that's
Everybody
crazy.
here is very healthy, and they're going to go jogging into the wilderness the next day and needs to get some sleep, I guess.
Wow. I should point out that we do have several listeners, Major Spoilers fans, who are from Germany and we've talked to, and who are also very, very cool people. So there you go. Get a chance. Go visit Berlin. I would like to go to Berlin sometime. Yeah.
And then they have the best, walking man, like stoplights in the world. Their walking man and then their stop man are so great, and they sell them on t-shirts, and I love them.
Okay, cool.
He got a hat and he's got a little suitcase. It's the best.
Very cool. Rodrigo, how many countries have you been to?
I have only been to the 3 in North America and Texas. Weehoo.
Well, it is like a whole other country.
That joke is truly never not funny because of the way Texans act. Love you, Texas. You have great steak.
Yep. All right. We are to our number 3s already. And Rodrigo, what do you have for your number 3?
My number 3 is, again, the specific event, but you can go to this place year round and it's pretty nice. The Friday Harbor Film Festival is in Friday Harbor, which is in San Juan Island here in the Puget Sound. And it mostly focuses on independent documentaries from around the Pacific Rim. So you can go there and watch documentaries about everything from salmon to the plight of native peoples to simply something interesting that's going on in Japan. Just kind of depends on what the crop is that year, but it's always interesting, and there's always a Q&A with somebody who was tied to the production after pretty much everything. And it's just an interesting mix of things. Usually, obviously, there's lots of kind of environmental stuff, but also human stories, funnier stories. It just kind of depends what you're into, and when you've got your little festival placard, what you can mark and what you can get to. Friday Harbor itself is very nice. It's one of the more touristy places in the islands. You can get there by a ferry. And interestingly, because I've been to Friday Harbor, now I've been to probably 2 of the 3 major locations in the movie Free Willy. One of them being Reino Aventura in Mexico, which doesn't exist anymore. I think it's a Six Flags now. And then Friday Harbor, where a lot of the kind of out and about island life shots were taken. And then the last one is like somewhere in Oregon. So I'm sure I'm going to end up there someplace because apparently I'm just weirdly retracing the movie Free Willy. But if you make it to the Pacific Northwest, if you're around, the Seattle area, you have to either travel really far north or take a lot of ferries to get to Friday Harbor. But it's worth it. It's pretty nice. And San Juan Island has a lot of other stuff. If you're like camping or hiking or that stuff where you have to actually use your feet to get places. There's lots of that going on as well.
Very cool. Very, very cool. My number 3 is one that I really would love to get back to at some point. And I'm going to kind of smash these two together because they kind of go together. And that is the Grand Tetons and Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Wow. The Grand Tetons. Just amazing, just wonderful, just fantastic. It's really weird because I've stood on the lake I'm thinking it's on the Wyoming side. And you just look up and it is just like amazing how placid it is, how majestic these mountains are. The last time I was there, again, this would have been, it was probably a 77 trip that we went in my family. There's 2 major vacations that I remember from my youth. One, we went south. So Dodge City, Albuquerque, Grand Canyon, San Diego, Tijuana, and then Anaheim. And then most of the rest were always north. So we'd go like Mount Rushmore and then hit everything in Wyoming for family reunions and vacations. But I remember as a 10-year-old boy, somewhere around there, 8 to 10-year-old boy, standing there looking at the Grand Tetons and just were like amazed at how wonderful this mountain range is. I mean, you drive, and we've driven through Colorado multiple times. I've been up to Pikes Peak. I've been, over the Rocky Mountains. I've been over the Appalachian Mountains. I've been and seen mountains, Ashley.
Yeah.
But there's something about just looking up at the Grand Tetons and just admiring how beautiful they are from all different angles. And I really want to go and do a tour of, if I had a dream vacation, this is not Dream Vacations, but I would love to do an Ansel Adams tour where you just go to all the spots where he took his now famous images and just stand there and look at them and try to picture them in the way and look at them in the way that Ansel Adams would have. And if you've ever seen his Teton Range from the Snake River, I really would love to have like a 4 foot by 7 foot giant image of that hanging on my wall.
I know what you're getting for Christmas.
7 foot by 4 foot, Ashley.
You can do one of those canvas like wrap around.
Yeah, you can. I don't know. It's like a couple of months ago, I really got into looking at Ansel Adams photography again, and just looking at how he used the scale to expose his shots, and then just looking at the Snake River shot and just going, man, I want to go back to the Grand Tetons again and Jackson Hole just to try and take that same kind of a photograph. And then I went on a search to see, can you find a giant image of that? And I couldn't find a giant image of that because I literally would hang that as one of my walls here in my office so that it looked like I was always looking out over the range. But the Grand Tetons, go and see that in Wyoming and Idaho. It's on the Idaho and Wyoming line. Wonderful, wonderful place. Let's see. Ashley, number 3 from you, please.
My number 3 is also in America. It's the only place in America that I put on my list. I initially thought it would only be like a 90-minute flight from where I live on the West Coast. But it turns out that it's actually like a 4.5-hour flight, which is such a long flight to still be in America. And that is Hawaii, specifically the island of Oahu, which is truly teeny enough that it might as well just be one city, but it's like 3 or 4 cities. This was a place that I went for my honeymoon, and I was like, it's just America. Like, what is so great? Why do you want to go there? And Jason said, I want to go see where they filmed Lost. And so we spent a lot of time trespassing onto land where they filmed Lost. And Hawaii is a really magical place because it's the closest place in America that you can get to places like Polynesia and Japan. And it really, really does feel like a merging of the two cultures, which I think is so fascinating. And when I was in Wellington, New Zealand, they had this huge map about the Maori and the original native New Zealand cultures. And it was a triangle, and it was like Polynesia, New Zealand, and Hawaii. And they drew a little triangle, and they talked about how the different tribes would go across these vast swaths of the ocean in their boats, and how they would share cultural similarities and foods and traditions. And that's kind of, I think, why Hawaii is so special. And if anyone has seen Lilo and Stitch or Moana, like, it's really like that. And I watched those two on the plane to Hawaii, and I wore a Lilo dress and a Moana necklace on the first day, and no one made fun of me. And we also climbed through a bird sanctuary while I was dressed like that.
Nice.
And they had very ugly birds who were preserved and nesting. They were truly the ugliest birds I've ever seen.
Were they frigates?
I don't know. They were
Did they
big
have, like,
and gray and
red...
fuzzy.
Oh, the babies were ugly. I see.
Yeah.
Well, come on, let's face it, all babies are ugly.
Oh my God. Well, that's a hot take that I don't totally disagree with. But the birds were so big and so ugly, but they were protected. Hawaii has like a special magic about it. And I think that's one of the reasons why people, really like going there. We did a lot of the touristy things. Like, we went to Marimoto. Or I might be having that name wrong because he's an Iron Chef. We went to the really famous shaved ice place, which was great. Waited in line. And Oahu is covered in chickens, just like feral chickens that look like the chicken from Moana. They just walk around and they want your ice cream and stuff like that. And we went and saw like a haka and a traditional dance performance. And I can't recommend doing all of the tourist stuff enough. I don't fully recommend trespassing. Like, we trespassed into like hunting grounds where you're definitely not supposed to be.
Yeah, you're not supposed to. I think there's actually an island. I think it's in Hawaii. There's actually an island that is off limits to anyone but the native tribe that is there.
I really want to go back. I want to go to Kauai, which is the smallest, least inhabited one, but also the one where Lilo and Stitch is set. Because it's supposed to have the greatest hikes in the world. But like, we wound up in this old sugarcane plantation that's a coffee mill now. And it was like all of your bohemian beach dreams rolled up onto one island. And it was so much more magical than I anticipated it being, which is why I'm low-key obsessed with it right now. But it's, it's not a cheap plane ticket to get back there from the mainland, but it's like always on my short list. And I think what's really fun about it is because it is a chain of islands, I would imagine that they are all culturally unique, and you can keep going back again and again and again without it feeling not reductive. But when you visit somewhere for the 5th or 6th or 7th time, you lose that wonder that you had the first time, and you have to get more creative with what you're going to do to engage yourself. And I think Hawaii is so vast and so special that you could probably get a good 5 trips out of it before you're repeating yourself.
Oh, yeah. I'm just amazed. There are a lot of people in the Los Angeles area, friends of mine and other people that I hear talking about there. It's like, oh, yeah, we're going to take a day off on Friday, and we're going to fly to Hawaii, and then we'll come back late Monday. And that's how they do a weekend getaway, is just fly to Hawaii for the weekend.
I mean, look, it must be nice to have that much money.
I know,
but
right?
Also, if I'm going to fly more than 3 hours somewhere, and someone else isn't footing the bill because, like conventions or what, like that's a whole other, when you're going and covering something, that's like a whole other ballgame. I want to spend a significant amount of time there because I hate being in the airplane.
That's what I would do too. I would like to just go for a week and just do. And actually, there's so much to see there, as you're talking about. But I kind of want to just go there for a week and do nothing.
Oh man, and the food is so good. And because we were perfect because we were 2 hours behind them because time zones.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can get yourself to the beach in the morning and you're ready to roll out by noon, you will beat all the rush.
Sweet.
And then no one's in the restaurants at lunchtime. So I highly recommend going and not trying to fix your sleep schedule. Just lean into it. It's amazing. And because it is a domestic flight, it is an expensive domestic flight. But I really think that people who are based in the United States should really try to take advantage of the fact that it is proximal, but such a unique and different experience.
Yeah, Hawaii is one of the few states. Hawaii and Alaska are, I think, the only 2 states that I've never been to.
Well, you've got me beat there.
Yeah. Well, like I said, for whatever reason, my dad would save up all of his vacation and do that 2 weeks vacation a year and use it all at once during the summer. Mm-hmm. And so from a very young age, I was on road trips all the time. I mean, there are trips that we've been to that I have very little memory of, like going to Washington, D.C. for the first time as a 3-year-old. I have very little memory of that, but my parents were like, oh, you were walking nonstop and climbing up over everything. And they've got all the pictures. I'm like, yeah, I kind of remember this, but some of those go way back. But yeah, those are the only 2 states I've yet to visit. And I want to get there someday, but not today. Because we've got to finish this show. And Rodrigo, you have a number 2 to share with us.
Yeah. My number 2 is a specific thing that happens in a town in Ohio called Circleville, usually in the fall, as you might expect. And that is the Circleville Pumpkin Show.
Ooh.
And what happens is all of the pumpkins float to Circleville. I don't know how they get there. But there is a lot of pumpkin themed stuff. So if you like having pumpkin in your, burger, you can go to Circleville and reasonably get some sort of gourd-based food and or drink, which is fine, which is good, I mean, people eat squash. That's a thing that happens. There's lots of interesting stuff going on. For example, if you go see the biggest pumpkins that they have, some of them are probably about the size of my car. Like these giganto pumpkins are really huge. I'm sure they don't taste like anything, and really they barely look like pumpkins, but they're there. Last time I was there, which was a long time ago, but last time I was there, they made a giant pumpkin pie, like a truly colossal, like something that like a couple hundred people could eat. They also have kind of a pageant. They have a Miss Pumpkin and Little Miss Pumpkin.
Get out.
So they
That's
do
so
look
cute.
up. You can look up Little Miss Pumpkin Circleville, and you'll see probably this year's winner and runner up. So yes, that is something that happens. It's cute. It's I've been to smaller towns in Kansas. I've been to smaller towns in Washington, and interestingly, small towns in Kansas and Washington are very similar, probably because of when they were built. Small towns in Ohio are different. They have this weird kind of New England-y feel to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Circleville looks like. Circleville is like a really, at least the Main Street kind, more historical area is really pretty and has a kind of a different feel from a lot of the other places I've been. If you're ever in Ohio, again, wherever you're going in Ohio, Circleville is probably a drive. It's not really on the way to anything, but it's there and it's fun.
Well, you got to make sure that you stay in Circleville and you don't go across the river into the next town, because that place is just Squaresville, man.
It is.
You love that one, Ashley. You love that one. All right, so my number 2 is one that is now the 3rd time a national park landmark has appeared on my list from the same state, from Wyoming. And the first time that I heard about this place was in a little movie called Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And I was like, oh, this is just some crazy made up place. Again, I'm a little kid. I'm like 7 years old, I think, when Close Encounters of the Third Kind came out. But I was like always fascinated with it because I'm like, that's where the UFOs are. We got to go there. And so again, one of these times when we're on a family vacation on the northwestern part of the trip, I think this was probably the same time we went to the Grand Tetons and to Yellowstone. We made a stop at Devil's Tower, and it's really cool. There's just all of a sudden this just big stone upcropping, this tower of stone just shooting up. And it's really neat to see. And it's really kind of neat to read the theories on why this formation happened and, how it could have happened and these kinds of things. The one thing that I remember thinking, the first thing that I remembered thinking when I saw this was, wow, it's a lot smaller in real life. Now, we were a long ways away, but if you've seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind, this thing looks incredibly huge from no matter what angle you're looking at. You could be like still 50 miles away and this thing looks huge, but we were 20 miles away and it still looked kind of tiny to me, but it's still very impressive. It is one of the, what is this? This is the first United States national monument, and it was created in 1906 by President Roosevelt. And it's really kind of a neat thing. If you've never seen it, if you've only seen it through Close Encounters of the Third Kind, I really recommend you go and see it in real life, because it's just so bizarre to see it from, to see this outcropping and just go, what is that? Why is that here? That looks nothing like those beautiful round Grand Teton Mountains we just saw the other day. What is this thing that's just jutting out of the ground? It's kind of weird to see, but it's also kind of majestic and really kind of neat to look at, especially when you look at the types of rocks, these kind of a squarish rock, or I don't want to say it's a crystalline formation, but the way these rocks are formed to create the columns is very, very cool. And apparently when I was a kid, it was illegal to climb on the mountain, to try to climb up to the top of the mountain, although people had tried to parachute in. But apparently I was reading some more about Devil's Tower today. It turns out that they now have like fairly easy accessible routes to climb to the top if you want to go. Now you have to obviously have some climbing abilities, Ashley.
Mm-hmm.
But if you wanted to climb onto the top of Devil's Tower, you could do that. And you wouldn't have to drive, you wouldn't have to fly very far. You wouldn't have to fly like to Hawaii. But you'd have to go to Wyoming. Yeah. And Wyoming in itself is rather interesting.
How far is Wyoming from?
So it would be from California. You would be California, Nevada, Utah, Wyoming.
It touches Utah?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I have a very limited grasp of American geography.
So you know how Utah has the little notch in the corner?
Yes.
That's where Wyoming is at.
Cool.
And so you know where Colorado is at?
Sort of.
So it's right next to Kansas?
Yes. I mostly know the ones I've been to. Right north
of Colorado is where Wyoming is at.
Okay.
There are not a lot of major cities in Wyoming. There's Cheyenne, and that's where
lot of my Stargate is.
Right. That's where a lot of my dad's family grew up. So a lot of my family reunion events happened in Cheyenne, Wyoming. So I know Wyoming very, very well. And it's only like an hour or what is it, like 2 hours, Rodrigo, from Denver? Seems like we get to Denver about 10 or so in the morning, and then by lunchtime or so, we're in Cheyenne.
Well, at least somewhere in Wyoming.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a super long drive. So if you get a chance, Ashley, go check out Devil's Tower. That's my number 2. What is your number 2?
My number 2 is a place that I alluded to in my last description of why you should go to Hawaii. And it is a place that I had been wanting to go for a long, long time. And then someone sent me there for work. So it worked out very nicely. And it is Wellington, New Zealand, the home of the New Zealand film industry / that place where Lord of the Rings shot so many things. I love Lord of the Rings, if people aren't aware. And so New Zealand for me has been a very magical place, but also a very far place. And as such, a very expensive plane ticket. And when I learned I was going to go, the only thing I wanted to do was go and see where they shot Minas Tirith, which is a functional rock quarry now, like outside of town. And was very fortunate that I want to give a shout out to him. This gentleman who runs private tours in New Zealand, his company name is Mike the Guide. Hit me up because he knew me from the internet, and he took me out there, and it was amazing. And New Zealand, maybe because it's an island, because I found that Australians are also a lot like this, New Zealanders are very, very sweet people. They all want to ask you where your funny accent is from, and then tell you all about the city and all about the places you have to go. And they were nothing but absolutely lovely and very, very helpful. Wellington is not the biggest city there is, even though the film industry is there. It's mostly centered out of there because that's where Peter Jackson lives. The biggest city is actually Auckland. So, like, you fly into Auckland, and I hate the Auckland airport because you got to run to a different building across the tarmac while you're sweating, and you've been on a plane for 13 hours to get on a smaller plane to go to Wellington. So it is like very buried in this mountain range on a waterbed, and it is like going to Middle Earth, except they have coffee. And it's it's kind of like Portland or Seattle in that way. Like it's a big city for the area, not compared to the United States, certainly, but it's big for the area. And they have a lot of really cool things. Like they have a lot of craft beers, and they have a lot of specialty coffees, and they have a lot of gastropubs. Like it's very vibrant, the city itself. And then the amount of places that you can go where they're like, oh yeah, this valley is the road that Frodo and Sam went down, and it's this from this movie. Like any movie that's shot in New Zealand, shot in and around Wellington. And if you are a film nerd, like I'm assuming most of the people listening to this podcast are, I think you will really get your money's worth if that is the only place that you can visit in New Zealand. Because again, I empathize. It is expensive to go to New Zealand. I want to go back and I want to do the full Lord of the Rings tour where you start at the top of the island and you go down and you go all the way through and you see everything, and then you go to the glowworm caves. But I think Wellington is so cool and so special, and it has retained that sense of this is a place where artists and creative people live in a way that Los Angeles and now New York have very much lost that through things like gentrification and the film industry. Wellington has managed to hold on to a lot of that, and it's just completely amazing. So if you would like to go to the other side of the world and you get a kick out of the toilet going the other way, because I definitely put it on my Instagram story, Wellington is the place to go. Mike the Guide is the person to hit up. And there are so many incredible, and it's all natural wonders, right? Like, it's a pretty city. There's lots of pretty murals and things like that, but it's so different from North America, and it so just feels like you are in Middle Earth at all times. So if you like being outdoors, it is the greatest place to go.
Very cool. Very, very cool. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have made it to our number ones, the top of our lists. People are writing all of these down because they're trying to book airfare or figure out how they're going to drive on their next vacation.
Yeah, really.
And now we've come to our final destination, Rodrigo. The number one spot, the number one thing to go and see the next time someone is on a vacation.
Yeah.
What you got?
The number one place you should visit is the Reptile Zoo in Monroe, Washington. Now, you might be thinking, is this place gigantic? No, it's pretty small. So what's interesting about it? Well, they've got an albino alligator. They've got a two-headed turtle, but those are just the things to lure the looky-loos in.
Okay.
They have all kinds of weird snakes. They also have all kinds of weird bugs. There are multiple times per day where a trained person will allow you to like touch certain reptiles, even like handle the snakes and stuff. Some snakes, not all snakes. Some of them are very aggressive and dangerous. They have these big tortoises that are just kind of around and you can pet them. Tortoises don't mind. And they also have a bunch of really nerdy names for all the animals. It's
like McSnurtle.
Yeah, I like some of them are pretty deep cuts. I mean, there's like a turtle. They have like a bunch of like box turtle type turtles, and it's like this one's named Leonardo, this one's named Raphael. And it's like, okay, all right. Well, that's to be expected, right? But then you get to like a snake, and it's like this snake is named Baroness, and it's like, all right, well, that's makes sense for a snake. And then you look at the next one, and the next one's named like Destro, and it's like, oh, I see what you're doing. And it's like super nerdy in there. It's like it was kind of surreal to go there and be like, oh, let me learn more about the snake. It's like, what's the snake named? It's like, oh, this snake is named Ganon. Like stuff like that. So I don't know. It's probably not that weird, but it kind of became its own sub game to figure out what thematically tied together particular groups of reptiles.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there were some obvious like Pokemon references, but there were some where it's like there's like a small one, and that's like the beginning evolution, and there's like a bigger one of a different species, and that was like the middle evolution.
Yeah.
And I'm like, who works here? Like how coordinated are you? Like, have you been planning these? Do you have a notebook?
I'm sure they do.
It's a weird place to be. It's kind of surreal, little bit liminal, the Reptile Zoo in Monroe, Washington.
All right.
But yeah, definitely, if you find yourself out in the boonies in Washington State, definitely stop by. Monroe's a nice town too. Like there's like 15 Mexican restaurants in Main Street. That's pretty good.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. All right. Very, very cool. All right. So I have to make a confession. My number one, I've only been to like super brief, like drive through kind of thing, not stop and look around. But I feel like I've spent so much time at my number one destination because of my Apple computer. Because every time Apple rolls out a new operating system, they come up with some clever code name like El Capitan or Lion or Tiger or whatever that they have. But when they rolled out Yosemite, one of the cool things that they did, and they still kind of do this depending on, what the name of the operating system is, they have some wonderful wallpapers that are taken from those locations. So in the case of Yosemite, they have wonderful shots of Half Dome that are just, wow, cool. And I just plaster my computer screen with all of these images of Yosemite National Park, and I feel like I'm there every single day. This is one that is just a little bit, when I was living in California, was just a little bit too far north for me to actually go to easily. Now, I don't know. Ashley's probably like, what are you talking about? We went there last weekend, Stephen.
We went 3 weekends ago. No.
Don't rub my face in it. But yeah, because it is like up there in the Sierra Nevadas, right? I mean, it can get cold up there.
Well, that's the wild thing. It was like already warm in LA, and then we couldn't actually get into the park because the one road was snowed.
Yeah.
So we went to see the world's oldest tree instead.
Which is also very cool because what is the redwood forest called? What's that forest called?
Muir Woods, but that's like San Francisco area.
Yeah. But yeah, that was just a little bit too far for me to make easy trips to. But oh my goodness, what a beautiful area that is. All the granite is, wow. Just go and see it. Ashley's already been there. Rodrigo, have you been to Yosemite?
I want to say that I have.
It feels very like your jam.
Yeah.
Yeah, I might be thinking of Sequoia.
Oh, that's the one I was thinking
they're
of.
They're like
Sequoia.
right next to each other.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
They're literally right next to each other. So, but yes.
So maybe I have, yeah.
My number one, beautiful location. I get to visit it every day because of the wallpapers from Apple. But Yosemite National Park, my number one vacation destination. And it's really something, I mean, if you're not a climber, you probably can see pretty much everything you want to see in a weekend, right, Ashley? Wouldn't you agree?
I would definitely say so. And there's a lot of nice places that you can stay up there, like Airbnbs or temp rentals and things like that. So you don't have to stay in the incredibly expensive hotels. Camping is also a very affordable option. And sometimes they have plugs. I'm a bad camper. I want to plug.
No, that's understandable. I do too. So there's my number one. Ashley, what do you have for your number one?
Oh, my number one is my favorite country in the whole world. Just all of it. It's the best. And that is Scotland. Yay. I love Scotland so much. Everyone sounds like a magical fairy. The food is terrible. The beer is adequate. The culture is amazing. It's full of weird, hairy cows. I went there for the first time when I was 14. My high school took us. Bad idea.
What?
They took our band. So we had to play in front of people in Scotland, England. It was great. But the first thing they did after they took all of these jet-lagged 14 to 18-year-olds across the Atlantic was they parked in front of a farmer's field so we could pet the cows, which is truly a gift that I can't recommend enough. And every time I go to Scotland, I'm like, we have to pet the cows. It's very trendy as a young woman to be into England or to be into France. But Scotland has always been my favorite. I think they have the coolest mythology. I think they have the best accents. Every time I read another book of Scottish history or mythology, there's a new place I want to go. I just learned about an island that's apparently used to be the home of a witch, and her broken down castle is there, and it's like a powerful place for women to go. I can't wait to go. I just love everything about it, and I find it friendly and quaint in a way that, and I love England, and I've been to England a bunch of times too. But Londoners, y'all real rude, and your service is terrible, and I guess that's why we have tipping in the States. But Scotland is like everything. I think that you kind of want Europe and specifically the English Isles to be, or it's everything that I want it to be. It is steeped in history. There's all kinds of old magic and henges. The weather's garbage all the time, so you got to go around in wellies or you're gonna die. And everyone is really sweet and friendly. And especially now that you don't have to convert money, when I travel now, I just take my bank card. I don't take any cash. I don't care. It's so much easier and so much more accessible. And kind of like Hawaii, Scotland is, and so is New Zealand, they are wild in this way that when you live in the middle of Los Angeles, you don't have easy access to.
Mm-hmm.
They're wild and they are lived in a way that, I understand as someone who is more familiar with that culture than I am of Native American culture, for example.
No, there was an interest.
Because there's been people living everywhere forever. I understand that.
Yeah, no, there's, I don't know what the quote or who came up with the quote, but, I was blowing the boy's mind the other day because I was like, oh, all of England can fit inside the state of Kansas. And he's like, oh, yeah, no way. And I'm like, yeah, way. And he's like, so you mean that we could drive from one end of England to the other in the time it takes us to go from, Hayes to Kansas City? I'm like, totally. And someone had shared this quote with me saying that in America, we measure. Oh,
that's true.
In miles, but in England, they measure in centuries. Just because there's things.
It's also true that in LA, we measure in the amount of time it's going to take.
Well, that's true. That's true. But it's kind of weird to think about that. And I think that's also interesting, and maybe not for you because Canada's also big and wide open and lots of space in between. But I think a lot of people are really amazed when you're like, oh yeah, I drove, took me 5 hours to drive from, Hayes to Denver. And people are like, in Europe are like, yeah, we drove through 5 countries in the same amount of time.
Yeah. So when I was a little kid, we lived on this army base called Petawawa, and there was always British military people coming to Canadian army bases because it's technically the same forces. So we lived in the building where they would dump all the British people. They would always live beside us. And these people's parents were visiting, and they asked my dad, we lived in Ontario, which is above New York City, and they wanted to go to British Columbia. And they said, well, what's the fastest way to get there? And he was like, fly. And they were like, well, how long will it take us to drive out of Ontario? And my dad was like, 2 days, 3 days. How long are you going to drive for?
Yeah.
That's so funny to me going the other way. It's also I was in Toronto recently and everyone was complaining about the traffic. And I was like, oh, you merely adopted the traffic. I was born in the traffic. But England and like the UK specifically is very fun and accessible in that way if you are brave enough to drive on the other side of the road, my friend.
I don't know if I'd be able to do that.
I'm not brave enough to drive anywhere, so.
Oh, you've got to learn how to drive, Ashley.
Figure it out.
I have a license. I just don't have a car.
Steven, you're from Kansas, and I saw you drive up a mountain, so.
That sounds like the name of a movie right there.
Yeah.
Totally.
The Art of Driving Up a Mountain.
Yeah. Yep. All right, listeners, we have shared our top 5 vacation destinations. Now it's up to you. Head over to majorspoilers.com, and in the comments section for this episode, share your top 5 destinations. Let us know where they are and maybe how long does it take us to drive there or fly there or whatever. Or you can head over to our Discord server and you can share your top 5 in our top 5 channel over at the Major Spoilers Discord. Also a link in the show notes. We enjoy doing this show for you and we enjoy bringing it to you as often as we can. And if you want more of this show, then by all means, let's keep it going. Head over to patreon.com/Major Spoilers and we can continue this show and maybe turn it into a weekly show in the very near future. That wraps it up for this week's top 5. We're looking forward to seeing your top 5. Why? Because everybody loves a list.
This podcast is copyright 2019 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC.